And good morning to you all and my friend Kevin Howard on this wonderful Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, February 11th, 2024 at approximately 10:30 a.m. my time. And it's a beautiful day in my neighborhood. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation because what we're going to discuss here today is something that we're obviously seeing millions of people react to, maybe even tens of millions and maybe more. I know that there's been like 100 million views, I believe. I don't know. I don't actually have the data on this, but we're going to discuss the substance and our reactions and what it means in context to what Kevin and I have been pressing forward with our other colleagues as well in context to the Clean New Deal. But Kevin tasked me with watching the Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin. And initially, I was kind of like, I have, for anybody who's paid attention to my truth bombs at Patrick Global Truth Bombs, the con on YouTube, I haven't been shy about my, um, my outlook towards Tucker Carlson. I'm a very transparent guy. I'm not afraid to uh, voice my positions, my opinions, because they're usually pretty thought out. But as I've learned from my colleague Kevin, there could be a lot more detail. And again, what I've learned from Kevin, particularly as it relates to what we're about to talk about, you know, I know the 2008 great financial crisis inside and out. I know the aftermath. I know the details of everything that's happened in every level of the game, from 20 years of policy, of deregulation, of the law, of things that everything that coalesces to create what the whole is, and then everything that happened in the aftermath that set forth this revelation of what I'm trying desperately, and Kevin's come on board too, and others, to try to shake the trees of the American consciousness to understand who is in control and why, and what that means that is completely not just antithetical, but illegal, and completely not just a contradiction to the ideals of the American process. It's a complete sabotage. It's something that's so beyond the pale of even comprehension once you understand the details. And you can get that blueprint at www.thecon.tv. But what that, you know, left me with, Kevin, over the course of the last many years is, there's a couple of subjects that envelop us all. I mean, you can't help but try to rationalize and understand and get your head around specific geopolitical scenarios, particularly over the course of the last several decades, stuff that we grew up with, that you ended up fighting in the front lines and in a tank regiment in the first Gulf War and that sort of thing. I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff play out over the course of the last 3 decades, but that was all kind of built and predicated, and this is the way the world goes, on the previous 4 to 5 or 6 or 7 decades. Everything is a continuum. Everything has its place. And I think I'll start my question to you, because I know that, there's a lot to get to. But, my first sort of reaction to kind of set the table is that however I interpret all of the nuances and the details and some of the things we're going to get into by way of what was positioning and how things were uh, orchestrated, if you will, in that interview, the most fascinating thing to me, and I know we'll come full circle to this, was that Putin identified the same problems, mostly through inference, but primarily the same problem, and inferred who's in control. And it actually stated why and what that means in the grand spectrum of history. And of course, he laid out a 1,000-year history in terms of perspective of, and I loved, I got to say this from the top. He interrupted Tucker on a couple of occasions. He said, "Is this going to be a serious discussion or is this going to be a show?" And that right there really set the tone for the scenario that we're all in. But again, to reiterate, and I'm just going to infer it. I'm not going to say it outright because our entire conversation is going to have to come full circle to this. But I look forward to your opening thoughts. Literally, Putin identified what I've been talking about in my truth bombs for the last year and a half, and what the con reveals and everything else. He didn't give us those types of details that I do. But what he did was he actually orchestrated who's in control, and then he played the game the way the real game at the highest levels on the geopolitical global stage is played. And we'll get into that. So, your opening remarks, my friend.
Well, before we get into the substance of my opening remarks, Patrick, I really have to make a small correction in terms of my military experience because you said it a few times and it's always been in the context of a conversation that I didn't want to digress. And I don't want this ever to blow up. My service in the military occurred prior, in the lead up to the first Gulf War. So I wasn't in Saudi, for example. I wasn't a part of I served under the Reagan administration. Okay. I was in NATO at the height of the Cold War when we put M1 and M2 Abrams across Europe. The very period, the very period, right? So I'm just trying to say, I'm not trying to be, feather my own nest and talk about, I was, So okay, so that's one thing, and that's I may have given you that somehow. I may have given you that impression. That's what I'm saying. I just want to clear that up.
I
But
just jumped
as
right into Gulf War One because I was thinking of several of my friends that were there at the time, and there was
yeah,
an association. So again, quite frankly, going into when we get to the Minsky Accords and things like that, details matter.
yeah, and so okay, and but where you started out, we're going to start out absolutely agreeing because that's my point. My point about the significance of this interview with Vladimir Putin is one, he framed it from the beginning with Tucker. Is this just going to be a show or is this going to be a serious conversation? Now it's a cultural thing. If you know something about Russian culture, and this is one of the history of this is a culturally rich society. I mean, just read Dostoevsky, read Tolstoy, right? They don't write 200-page books. It's like 1,000 pages and stuff like that. So when they say a serious conversation, they mean that we're going to bring all facts to bear. We're going to bring historical context to bear. We're going to take our time and have a long form conversation. And this is a world leader talking to a media person, let's say, right? And say, oh, okay, can we have a real conversation? And what we saw in that conversation, just from 10,000 feet, is a world leader took 2 hours. I mean, when in our lifetimes has a world leader take 2 hours to have a serious conversation on a variety of issues that impact us and them, right? It's never happened. None of the interviews. Okay, so here this is legendary for that reason alone. Tucker agreed to have a serious conversation. We're gonna penetrate past the bumper stickers, right? And he did exactly what you said. The thing about the truth that you found out from 13 years, over 13 years of research dedication to penetrate the nonsense story we were told in the Great Recession, the Great Financial Crash. We were told a narrative as to how that happened. People bought too much house. They couldn't. They bought a house they couldn't afford, and all such nonsense, blaming the actual people who were victimized by what Wall Street did. The narrative was the lie. The narrative was a part of the con. What Putin reveals in this conversation, right, is that the narrative is the con. Okay. Now, so what I'm going to say is once we get into the substance of whether what he said, how can, what amongst what he said is true, let us apply the wisdom of Reagan and Gorbachev. Trust but verify, right? Okay. If, the idea of rejecting out of hand because it's Putin, everything he says, right, simply belies our own personal experience. The fact is, there is not one bit of truth that any of us, you and I, or the people who are watching this podcast, right, we have never discovered the truth on the basis of one-sided point of view only. That's not how we discover the truth. We need to look at it from different perspectives. We need to get different sources, and then okay, that's how we learn what actually is true. So here we are, right? He's given us the Russian point of view, and up to this conversation, up to this interview, American media, Western media, has given no credibility to any other point of view but the Ukrainian point of view. Everything else is apologist. Everything else is Putin apologists. Everything else is rejected as illegitimate, right? Okay, so therefore we have a very one-sided point of view as to what happened in Ukraine and why Russia did this. So let us at least test whether what he said is true. Okay, because if it's true, it has profound implications consistent to what you're doing, Patrick. If what he's saying is true, the prevailing narrative has lied to us and is doing what Chomsky speaks of, manufactured consent, manipulating us for whose benefit? Who benefits then, right? Okay, so let's see what he said is true. So that's my opening gambit, right? Because I think what he said is some powerful things, and he's called us constantly to verify him. Okay, so now that's my opening statement. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think it's really important. Because we're not going to get this conversation in mainstream media. All they've done is dismiss this as a storm.
That's the most important point. And, and what's going to be, what I'm really looking forward to is, and I know we have a significant disagreement on our personality test by way of Tucker Carlson. Okay. I'm going to let it fly on Tucker. Okay. Cause I want to see your reactions, but I'll do that at the appropriate time. But I want to address a couple of things you said first to move this thing forward. First of all, I'm so happy that you quoted Putin quoting Dostoevsky, right? Now, I've been trying to get to reading Dostoevsky for now years. I know that he's one of the greatest and he's a classic. And the whole time I was watching the interview, I was thinking in my mind, this sounds a lot to me like what I've inferred I would understand if I read Dostoevsky. And so when he quoted that, I was like, wow, okay. But again, what I really appreciated, because I find myself doing a lot in these truth bombs, is Putin did a truth bomb on 1,000-year history of Russia and ultimately laid out from the Russian perspective, the nature of the development and what Ukraine is in the context of the Russian, I don't know if a confederation is the appropriate terminology, but I'm imagining, because again, I'm not an expert in Russian history, right? I really appreciate Russian history, and I appreciate one of the greatest revelations that we in the West, particularly Americans, have never really fully understood. And it's taken me years to try to wrap my head around it, but I spent the time to do it. And that's the Soviets' position, execution, everything that had to manifest during World War II against Hitler and the Nazis. And the extreme sacrifice, the misery, it's beyond. I mean, we talked about tank division and everything else just briefly, but the tank battle between the Nazis and the Germans was like nothing before seen in history, right? The sheer scope and size of the Nazi invasion, and the name of it is just off the tip of my tongue. Remind me, Kevin, what was the German invasion called
Of of
of
you talking
Russia?
about of Russia? In World War II?
Yeah, I can't think of the name of it, but I mean, again, the Germans made the exact same mistake they did in World War One. But the point being
Well,
is that
they made the same mistake that Napoleon made.
true, but exactly.
The two front
And this is
wars.
history, and to hear the
Yeah,
Russian perspective of 1,000 years of history, right?
right.
And again, I don't know all the details. Like I know quite a few details of everything from the American Revolution all the way through the North American or the Indian Wars, through the Mexican American War, through the slavery and the Civil War. Like I've got that pretty detailed, right? All the way through civil rights and World War II from the American side, loosely understanding, Russian perspective. And I mentioned Dostoevsky and everything else, but it was a lesson in history for me listening to it from his side. Now, I did read a few, reactions from what appears to be a whole vestibule of Poland's reaction to Putin's positioning, which was fascinating, right? But again, I've had a very respectful, quite frankly, and I think pretty accurate, considering what I listened to, perception of who Putin is. Putin has always been intelligence. He has always been KGB. He comes from a perspective, and there's a lot that he's gleaned and learned about the globe and the way it works over the course of his entirety of his position of power, and everything that he had to probably hold on to make Russia what it became, for better or for worse. And to hear his perspective on all this stuff, and on a kind of a human plane, you know, by the way, as a producer, I do want to address this. You're right about Western media, right? Western media would not have sat down and allowed him to speak for 2 hours. They would have taken little bits and pieces. They would have carved it up. They would have created a narrative, and they would have had, let's consider Leslie Stahl and 60 Minutes, right? There would have been some sort of, and it probably, they would have to like get CIA's approval. They would have to get, people's approval within the Beltway, for them to do things, and their legal would talk back and forth. And then they'd give us some sort of like 15-minute version of it, which they would interpret as what we want to take away from it, which would be complete manipulation, which is in its own right, intelligence, psyops, and everything else. Again, asymmetric information, which we show you in the con. Again, in the con, we could have done what everybody else did, right? We could have done an hour documentary to try to plug as much into it as we could, and just leave it as that, at that, right? And then maybe check off all the boxes of algorithms of what networks and gatekeepers, and maybe put somebody like Matt Damon as the narrator, right?
Right.
Instead, we use me as the protagonist because I'm the one who did the research. I'm the one who found the answers. I'm the one who went on the journey to get all of these situations. And we laid it out in a 5-part series, which, as it turns out, is 5 hours. And that's just the first half of what it is that I've actually got. So to
Absolutely.
your point about this 2 hour interview and what Putin was saying in context, everything else, but it also enabled us, because of what I said, my perception about intelligence and everything else, in terms of a producer, and potentially what Tucker's role is. I want to say two things, and I'm going to let you roll with it for a while, because this thing could go in so many different directions, and I hope we can get all of the pieces in
Oh,
here because they covered a whole lot. But the first thing was, I had a perception going into this interview that Tucker was, quite frankly, in some manifestation, okay, because I've been saying this in my truth bombs, and I've been saying it to you personally and others, in our personal conversations, that I've observed what appears to be a communications hierarchy. Okay, I look at Tucker as kind of a central piece. I look at an echo chamber through Russell Brand, a kind of a dovetail into basically on different situations into Matt Taibbi, which is incredibly frustrating and interesting at the same time for me, because Matt Taibbi was one of the best we've ever had until a lot of things that have transpired. And I will say this: Matt Taibbi did reveal recently a lot of what he thinks about Elon Musk, and we'll pack that away because later in the broadcast, Putin addressed Elon Musk. But Greenwald and all of these other guys are kind of satellites to what Tucker talks about. And then, Jimmy Dore and some of these other guys that I've been paying attention to for years, they've created their own echo chamber. Okay. And they've created their own positioning because they believe it to a certain degree, and they live with it. But at the same time, I've seen and I've observed way too much fundamental, what I've seen in mainstream media forever from both parties. They have hierarchies of communication, whether it's Rachel Maddow and the Wall Street Democratic revolving door in their echo chamber, and same with Republicans and Fox. Okay. This is a different version, but at the same time, my point is, I thought that potentially Tucker was on the lam working with, in some strange, kaleidoscope of funding, potentially directly with Putin. That was my perception, honestly. After
I,
that interview yesterday, I don't think that at all. I think after that interview yesterday, what I saw was Tucker Carlson working for an agenda that is somebody that he's in a constellation of, which we'll explore later, but it wasn't directly Putin. I think Putin told us exactly what Putin wanted to tell us. And again, like I said in this tweet last night that got a lot of attention, and it also rubbed you the wrong way because you thought I was demonizing these guys. But what I said was, in my opinion, Putin is not the existential threat. Our corruption is. And we're hearing it from him, that is revealing and inferring what the corruption is. But because he's KGB, from the long, his job the whole time is to leverage the United States and the global geopolitical paradigm. And it has been, and he's in a different place now. Okay, so that's the first part. And then the second part of this point is the neo-Nazi aspect of Ukraine. Okay, so for me, looking back at World War II, and what the Russians and the Soviets had to endure and had to overcome and prevail. And thank God they did, because Americans do not know this information. They don't realize that I think we lost somewhere in the magnitude of 400,000
Yeah,
men in World War II. And it was an unbelievable sacrifice. And
yeah,
if the United States didn't do what it did in the manner that it did, World War II would have gone a different direction. But
absolutely.
people, you have to understand the Soviets lost probably to the Nazis somewhere on the order of 20 million. They were battling in places like Stalingrad, in foxholes face to face, hand women. Everybody was in the mix with temperatures, 30, 40 below zero, where frostbite. And I mean, the conditions were so mammothly horrific and so huge that the sacrifice that the Soviets made, regardless of what you think about ideology, was on a level that history had never seen before. And had the Russians, the Soviets, Stalin, the Man of Steel, and all of these, the motherland and those things that he brought up in context to like the ultimate enemy to Stalin are the Nazis. And I was like, me too. The Nazis are the ultimate enemy. Now, there's a lot of different variables that we can work through this and hopefully we'll get to. But I wanted to set that table for you because, look, regardless of what I think about Tucker, Putin was in complete control of that interview. And he made some unbelievably important points, both from the historical perspective of the Russian experience, which you characterize as culture, but also he brought up the points that if we can find a way to thread the needle to the American consciousness, hopefully we can interpret what Putin was telling the world, that the United States is top heavy, that it's run by central intelligence with its financial system that has completely pulled one over on the world, and it's not sustainable, and it's going to fall in on itself. And his whole point was that I heard in the end, why would you want to go fight a war and stick your nose into something that's tens of thousands of miles away from your own problems, which he emphasized accordingly. And he certainly emphasized them in a specific way that was going to have traction, both with sound bites and all the other stuff. And he did that masterclass. But the long and the short of it is that I didn't interpret, again, going back to your point in our previous Truth Bomb conversation, the Minsky Accord, and I'm not sure if that's the right way to phrase it.
It's an agreement. It's the Minsky agreement.
The
Agreement.
Minsky Agreement, the history of Russia, all of these elements, plus his awareness in context to, quite frankly, the evolution of BRICS, right? He brought that up. Basically, he covered everything that we're talking about in our truth bombs, Kevin, but he didn't give the details of what we have in a way that the entirety of our system has to prevent from getting to tens of millions of people, because that is really the central paradigm of what I've been trying to get the American people to understand for at least the last 3 years once we released the con and I've done the truth bomb. So anyway, thanks for hearing me out on that. Now I want to hear how you respond and which direction you take this.
Yeah, and what I'm going to do is try to now focus us laser beam on the key points that he mentioned, and for us to test whether what he said was true. As it relates to the just the history that he laid out, where he laid out over 1,000 years of Russian history, and why it's critically important that every person listening to this call watch that entire interview is, first and foremost, there's no way to not come away from the interview recognizing that Putin is completely lucid, appears to be completely healthy, right? Again, part of the narrative that we've been told that this man is suffering delusions of grandeur. He's crazy. He's dying of cancer. All types of nonsense. I mean, we don't know what's true, but what you can't look at that person in light of our current president, right? Or in light of Donald Trump confusing, Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley. Okay, the idea is when you think of these compared to him, he is on top of his mental faculties. I mean, this guy is citing thousands of years of history. Right? You know, he knows this stuff, right? Okay, so he's lucid. So at the risk, we're not going to bury the lead. The first big bullet point, my friend, is he has stated as clearly as you can state, Russia has no expansionist interests. Now, okay, and I'm saying, okay, well, can we tell if that's true or not? Okay, Putin has basically controlled Russia since 2000, 24 years. Okay, where has Russia expanded? I mean, look around the globe. Look, okay, where has Russia expanded since the dismantling of the Soviet Union? And and how about this? Where has NATO expanded since the disillusionment of the Soviet Union? Okay, if there has been conflict between Europe and Russia, and we can look at 200 plus years of history to see, okay, Napoleonic Wars, World War One, World War Two. Where has the conflict come from? Has it been Russia attacking Europe, or has it been a Europe attacking Russia? Okay, right? It's always Europe attacking Russia. Okay. And what you have expressed in the opening part of your conversation, your last comment, was the last time the sacrifice that Russia made to defend itself against European aggression was the loss of 20 million Russians. Some estimates are up to 27 million. Okay. All right. This is a magnitude of sacrifice that America has never experienced. Okay. At the hands of fascism. Okay. So the significance of this notion of Russian expansionism is they agreed in the early 90s to dismantle the control that they took over Eastern Europe, which served as a security buffer, right, in response to World War II, right? So all those countries in Eastern Europe were part of the security buffer to defend against Western aggression. Okay, right? So who's expanded where? Russia has not expanded. They contracted all the way to Russia. They took in all their nukes all the way to Russia. The terrorists never got that, right? Okay, right. They supported the
Was your
reunification.
point? Can I just ask you a quick question about that point? Do you mean, because it would be fascinating if you brought this up, because of the retraction of the Russian geology, what am I saying, geography, including Kazakhstan? Was that what you were referring to in terms of nuclear weapons? They retracted, like, I don't know if they had nuclear weapons. I'm assuming they
Yeah.
did.
Oh no, Ukraine had there were
Well, of
nuclear
course
weapons in
Ukraine did, but
Ukraine. There was nuclear
Kazakhstan,
weapons there were nuclear weapons in East Germany.
right,
I mean,
right, 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 right.
yeah.
Okay,
So
that's your
yeah,
point, though.
that's my point. My point is we can see what we can verify ourselves that who has expanded since the Soviet Union dismantled their empire, right? It's not Russia moving towards Germany. It's NATO moving all the way to the Russian border. And Tucker asked him straight out, the fear of you attacking Ukraine is that you would go on and attack Poland. And he's like, why would I do that? Russia asked him specifically, under what circumstances would you attack Poland? Only if they attacked Russia, right? And the thing about it is, you could say that's propaganda, but he's been in control for 24 years. When did he attack Finland? Okay, so let's narrow to, okay, yeah, but you've attacked Ukraine. And let's look at, and he laid out what others have said. It's not, Jeffrey Sachs, the noted, historian, professor at, I think, Columbia University, and he's involved in
Who I've
United
interviewed, by
Nations.
the way.
Huh?
I've interviewed him.
Yeah, okay. Others have said what Putin is saying, right, about what has happened in Ukraine, right? The reason why the war in Ukraine did not start in 2022. The war in Ukraine started back in 2014. And how, with what, right? Ukraine had their first democratically elected government leading into 2014. And that government was due to have the next time they would run for re-election was 2015, right? That government was neutral to the point of joining NATO because it was a part of the Ukrainian constitution that Ukraine would stay neutral, right? Okay. The reason what
Right, yeah,
happened
that's
is
a hugely important point. Okay, because let's set that up just really quick because of
no, Patrick, let me finish. I'm
okay.
sorry. I got to finish the point, right? And then you could absolutely respond. The point is the war started when the United States participated, the CIA participated in funding the violent overthrow of the democratically elected government in Ukraine, right? And installed a government that was committed to joining NATO. And the proof that we can all validate is Victoria Nuland was caught on tape talking to the ambassador, I believe the ambassador to Ukraine, about who the new government would be before they overthrew the existing democratically elected government. And it turned out to be absolutely true. Google it, people. Okay. So the United States paid for and participated in the violent overthrow of the democratically elected government of Ukraine to install a government committed to join NATO. That government comes in, right? Because you mentioned the Minsk agreements. That government comes in, and the first thing they decide to do is wage an internal war on ethnically Russian Ukrainians living in Donbass, right? Killing up to like 15,000 of them. Okay. This is when Russia intervened in defense of ethnically Russian Ukrainians, right? Okay. The peace agreement to stop the war, internal war with Ukraine against, which is essentially like ethnic cleansing, right, against ethnically Russian Ukrainians, was the Minsk agreements. Germany, France, and Russia signed the agreement, and the leadership of Ukraine signed the agreement. The Ukrainian parliament refused to ratify the agreement, and the government that we installed said we're not going to abide by the agreement, the Minsk agreement, which would have been a peaceful settlement of how to deal with those southeastern Donbass area and stuff like that, where there was a concentration of ethnically Russian Ukrainians. Okay. The Ukrainian government said they weren't going to abide by the agreement. And what happened then? The United States started training the Ukrainians militarily. The United States started building bases in Ukraine, right, right, for NATO, right, as the Ukrainian government pursued, the path of joining NATO. And it's in response to that the Russians ultimately came in and attacked, Ukraine full force in February of 2022. Okay, we can verify all of that. Okay, do it. Okay, the significance here is the story that we were told is that Putin intends to create the Greater Russia, an expansionist, a new version of Hitler, right? And we have drummed up our European partners to increase their military spending in order to prepare for a Russian aggression. When the fact is that what we can see outside of the rhetoric is that it's NATO who has moved all the way across Eastern Europe, all the way and then when they couldn't by honest means get Ukraine to join NATO, they overthrew their government and installed the government to join NATO. So who is the aggressor here? It is not Russia intending to expand. It is NATO intending to move to their border, right? And okay, so I'm going to stop there. Do you agree with that, Patrick? I mean, do you dispute those
No, no,
facts?
no. I look again. I look at it, and I always have looked at it through this lens initially, right? So I understand the Cold War. I remember what happened in 1991. I remember, from my studies where we started with Was it Teddy Roosevelt and our kind of walking with a big stick and all the buffers within North America, and how we sort of thought through that process, and like we talked about in the last conversation, the Cuban Missile Crisis and how we would respond. And yeah, I was very much aware of the NATO expansion, and that's the lens I was always working through. You know, when I listened to Putin yesterday, again, what was fascinating to me was the Donbass region, the nature of Ukraine, given broader Mother Russia. You know, and again, I can understand culturally. You know,
Patrick, can I interrupt? I mean, please. I mean, I want to hear what you're saying right here. I do. But do you agree with the facts
I
that
just said
Putin
I
laid
did.
out there? Oh,
I just said
yes.
I did.
Oh, you said you did. You did. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah.
Please
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. I don't
Yeah.
want to. I don't want to snap, but at the same time, no, I acknowledge that, and I was giving you the
Okay.
prism through which I
Yeah.
was looking from a common sense sort of perspective.
No, I
Again, we're
appreciate it.
talking about in my mind, the former Soviet Union that expended 20 million plus lives to defeat Hitler, which I have
Yeah.
incredible respect for. And I understand the Cold War, and I understand all of the buffers and what happened in Berlin, and I know where we were, and then the split. And this is the most important part of the conversation for me. And because of what you just said, I find myself compelled to fast forward. But what was the whole purpose of the Cold War besides competition? It was between two political ideologies. But as it turns out, we know because we had the conversation about capitalism, and it turns out that the actual definition of capitalism isn't just an economic system, it's a political system. But the idea of the entire Cold War was capitalism versus communism. And then when you look at what was the purpose of, for example, Vietnam 30, 40, 50 years later looks like exactly what we've seen throughout the entire paradigm of neoliberalism, which is exploit. I hate to even call it third world labor, but it's just exploit cheap labor without any sorts of regulations to produce as much product as possible because of the middlemen, because of the way the financial system supposedly works vis-a-vis capitalism that many people might interpret as risk reward, in that the marketplace determines the outcome, which we both understand. And we've had the discussion, and I have a little bit more of a specific sort of come from when I say we're not capitalists because of what Putin was inferring. Because Putin says that who runs the United States? He says it's intelligence, and he was in his outlook towards the CIA was one of absolute respect of somebody of the actual competition.
Yes.
He was like,
Yes.
they're real,
Yeah.
they're
And
legit.
he described their effectiveness in
And I'm thinking
overthrowing
when
the
he's
Ukrainian.
talking about that, he's talking like we both know that Russians are incredibly committed to chess. And
Yes.
Putin is probably three-dimensional chess on overload. And that was my impression of him the whole time. Some of the mainstream media did get to me because I thought that he had made some mistakes in the campaign that seemed to be a little bit off, that I didn't expect him to make mistakes in a way that I thought, well, maybe he is in a weird space. But given what I saw yesterday and the lucidity and what you talked about, I certainly found myself going, I don't think that's the case at all. And I can only imagine, what the reality is, given what I know about our own reality, right? But to try to finish this thought, yes, I acknowledge that everything that you just said in terms of expansionism being central to the idea of NATO. Now, you got to understand too, when I listen to him say this, I think about my friend, who I've personally interacted with and I've followed forever, Yanis Varoufakis. And I understand his thinking about the European Central Bank and everything that they did post 2008. Not to mention to Greece, and then ultimately, when I think about the Germans' position in there, of course, Deutsche Bank is a big red flag for me, not to mention their relationship with Russia, which we'll get into in a little bit. But when I'm putting all of these pieces of the puzzle together, you know, I did not get the impression that we need to fear Russian aggression of expansion, and to do so is a monumental mistake, but it undergirds everything that he's talking about, which brings into more focus what I've been trying to get people to understand the whole time, especially is when we consider the BRICS. We cannot, in any legitimate way, express the export of democracy and free markets anymore. That's been my point the whole time. That's not what we are. We are not a democracy, and we are not a capitalist free market system. It's completely centralized. And like I've said before, and I know people will cringe when I say this because it's cringe-worthy, but it's the truth. The full faith and credit of the United States created an incredible backdoor, which is direct funding of a criminal apparatus using what can only be interpreted as socialism for what you have referred to as the elite. Again, I don't call them elites, I call them criminals that have completely hijacked the system that Putin calls the CIA, which he takes very seriously as the guy who's been fighting him for the last 50, 60, however, long he's been in the KGB and then into the presidency, 24 years plus. How long? Going back to the 60s? I think he was in, I don't know.
Oh no, in the 80s, go back to in terms of Putin himself. In the
He was in the,
KGB,
it was in the
it was
80s.
in the
It
80s.
wasn't in the
Yes.
70s when he was, anyway, it doesn't
I
matter.
mean, I'm sure his service career may have been in,
I don't know how old he is.
primarily in
Is he
it's the 80s in
75
Poland.
plus, or is he? I mean, he's not as old as Biden or
I don't think so.
Trump, is he?
Right.
Certainly, if he is, he certainly is a lot more spry and younger and a lot
Yeah,
smarter than both Biden and Trump. There's no question about that. But I got to finish this point though, because you want to drive it a bunch of different ways, which I can't wait to go with, and I've got many of my own points. But again, to react, I did not take away that Russia is expansionist. I do agree with the bigger picture that we're top heavy and we're about to fall based on everything that he just said, and he's waiting for that day, let me tell you. And he's trying to move it along as quickly as possible because we are up his ass with funding Ukraine. And again, I think one of the biggest key considerations is when you look at this whole thing in terms of the Minsky Accords and the culture and everything else, you do have to ask yourself, what would be potentially. I never really had a dog in the fight in the Ukraine thing myself, personally, because I never thought it was in terms of the ideology that would manifest me to be life or death, right? What's worth fighting and dying for, from my position? Liberty and justice for all, and the integrity of law, which has been my point the whole time, which we don't have, right? So going back to my next point to move on, and I guess I'll ask you the question. So I acknowledge that it's not expansionist. I understand all of the details that you talk about, the sort of betrayal of the CIA and moving the Minsky Accord and what all of the everybody had agreed to. And I want to bring up this point because again, it's incredibly important. Putin said, yeah, it was the CIA that did Nord Stream. Of course, he didn't say that. He said who had the capacity and the ability and the incentive to do it. And there's only a handful of people that could have pulled that off. And yeah, and he didn't ever say it. And Tucker kept saying, do you have the evidence? Do you have the evidence? And he kind of just, because what those guys, what I was hearing from what Putin was saying is there are back channel agreements with very high level, and organizations, be it CIA or holding companies and allies and everything else, that they can talk about certain things, right? So he doesn't want to bring that to the global public and make that central. They'll do that all behind the scenes, but he just gave us enough to wrap our heads around that. And so if you think about, and this was the one place where I actually thought Tucker asked a genuinely revelatory question, was why would the Germans play ball when their entire economy would be leveraged by the US sabotaging Nord Stream? And so when I thought about that, the only thing that my mind could go to is what Giannis says all the time, which is exactly what I've been saying all the time. That's our geopolitical control vis-a-vis what the Fed has been able to pump past 2009 and really long before, which has been my opinion the whole time. The CIA leveraged through the global reserve currency, basically this sort of climate of all of your power hierarchy, play ball with us and we'll make sure you're rewarded. And that's exactly what we've been doing for decades.
No, great comments, Patrick. So we agree that Russia has no expansionist interests. He said it expressly.
Absolutely.
And their history has
Not that I can see.
demonstrated that. The history has demonstrated they have not expanded. The only people who've expanded is NATO has expanded, right? And okay, we agree that the reason why they attacked Ukraine because the United States participated in funding the
Let's just
violent
say I buy
overthrow.
that, but I bet there's a lot more to it than I know. Let's just,
No,
I'm sure there's a lot more
no,
to it,
no,
but
no.
I
We
buy
for
that.
this we no no we
I
if
don't know all the answers to it.
in order to make progress, we can't have any shallow rationales. Either you
Wait a
have
second. We can have
information.
disagreement. Yeah, we can. We can
No,
have.
no, no. We can no. Of course, we can have disagreement, but let's not disagree on the facts, right? He
So
laid
far,
out
you've been bulletproof. Yes.
right. Victoria Nuland, the way we know that the United States participated in the overthrow of Ukraine, right, is because we have it on tape. The Assistant National Security Advisor talking to the ambassador to Ukraine about who the government is going to be. Right. We overthrew a democratically elected government who, on the issue of NATO expansion, was neutral to install people that Victoria Nuland said we were going to install, and we did install
Okay, you
them.
made the
And they
point. I understand it, but let's
right.
go to the next point.
Right. So I'm just going over. We're building
Fine,
blocks
fine.
here.
Dude, I'm not trying to discount it, but I've already acknowledged that I think that
No,
everything
no,
that
no,
you've
no.
stated so
I
far
know
is
you
correct.
have, Patrick. It's to the people who are listening, because I mean we talk, we make our points, but the takeaway is Russia has no expansionist interests. They
That's my
have attacked
takeaway.
you.
Again, I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
know the details of what the CIA did. Everything you're saying, I buy, but again, I haven't studied it like I have the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. I'm not challenging you. I'm just saying I don't have all the answers. I'm learning from you. So if you want to make your point that this is what is the causality of the whole thing, until further notice, and if I get the time to study it and, until I come up with a different thing, but that's not my motivation. Everything that Putin said so far, and I'm acknowledging, and I'm looking at your face, and I don't know if I'm reading this correctly, is that he is not expansionist, that the CIA betrayed the Minsky Accords through what you're talking about. And so that's the starting place of what your point is of how we need to regard the Ukrainian situation as we move forward. Because again, we have to acknowledge that Putin kept saying, especially towards the latter half of the interview, that of course he's open to negotiations. And I didn't know that either. Honestly, go ahead.
See, exactly, Roger. I was supposed to be talking now. Okay. Okay. I am trying to underline what we agree on. Okay. And so if you're saying you're not committed to you do not accept it as a fact, based on the evidence that Victoria Nuland absolutely stated who
I
the
just
new
spent five
government of.
minutes saying I do agree to that, and I don't have
Okay,
all the
okay. So
information.
then just leave it. You don't have to respond then. This is my time to respond, right? So first thing,
Okay.
Russia has no expansionist interest in Ukraine, right? And that it's NATO that caused the problem. Okay. The second thing, what you just were alluding to, is Russia is prepared to engage in a peace treaty right now, right now. And the proof of it is they negotiated a peace treaty, the Minsk agreements, in 2014 that the Ukrainian government has broke, even though Germany and France guaranteed they were guarantors on that agreement, right? Okay, all right. Before they moved the forces into Ukraine in February 2022, right? Putin and the Russians put a request out to the United States and NATO to negotiate the NATO question, and come up with an agreement. NATO responded by saying Russia has no interest, nothing to say about who and how NATO expands, even if that includes the country on their very border. Okay, so therefore he did attack. We know, as he said in the interview, that they negotiated a peace treaty. They negotiated a peace treaty with the Ukrainians, in Istanbul, right? A couple of months into the war, right? And stuff like that. They had reached an agreement, and it was Boris Johnson, at the behest of the United States, who got in there and convinced, twisted the arms of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to not agree, promising them that we would arm them and support them in the defeat of Russia. So again, the reason why we're still fighting, the reason why over 300,000 Ukrainians have been killed, right, is because we we pressed them to not have the agreement that they had already agreed to with Russia, right? So, okay, once again, Russia is saying we are willing to do peace now. It is not Russia who wants to have the war. It is the United States and NATO. And we have expressed as much. Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, said that the point of the war in Ukraine is to weaken the Russian military assets, right? Biden himself said the quiet part out loud by saying the goal in Ukraine is regime change, is to get Putin out. This is the stuff we have said as a matter of public record. Okay, so let us be clear once again. Russia is prepared to negotiate peace treaty now. Americans need to understand that. They need to understand that Russia has negotiated peace multiple times relating to the question of Ukraine in history, and it's the United States and NATO who scuttles these efforts. We want the fight. Americans don't know that. That's not the narrative they've been told. Do you disagree with that?
What I remember from Biden's point was that it was an old man saying something out loud. Hold on, that they walk back, but that doesn't take it back. And I think it is a valid point. Look at, dude, listen to me. You're starting to take this to a level like you think I'm the guy that's taking the NATO position and buying the propaganda. I'm not. I'm telling you that I'm listening and I'm hearing and I'm learning. And what I'm interested in is when you make a position like Biden, there was no caveat to what you just said about Biden saying there needs to be regime change. He did. He did say that. Okay.
Yeah.
And I remember when he said that. And it was one of those things. And this is my other issue with Biden. He does say stupid stuff on occasion in the weirdest ways, that is that his inner voice out loud, which brings all sorts of issues to me that no, Biden is too old to be our president. He is just a parrot head for this system that we're talking about, that Putin has revealed, that I'll say for the fifth time today, that's the most important takeaway for me, that the intelligence of the CIA and the financial system is what controls the United States, and it's top heavy and it's going to collapse. That's what his point is. Now, to everything that you're talking about, yeah, do I think, I keep thinking from the perspective of Giannis, why is NATO, but this underscores everything, right? This is what I've been trying, the expansionism of NATO under the global paradigm of what we've had for 50 plus years that's super reliant on fossil fuels. That's the other question that I would like to go into, unless you want to make another point. There was a slight transition in that dialogue when Tucker had asked Putin, is the world divided between two energy production camps? And do you remember that? And do you remember what his response was?
I do not remember, and I've watched this interview multiple times. I do not remember. I'm not
It
saying
was it was a sleight of hand, and it didn't go the direction I was hoping it would, because I kept thinking when they brought it up, I was thinking about that moment when I saw MBS and Putin kind of laughing, and I think 2018, and that image is seared into my mind. What were they laughing about, right? Because Russia and Saudi compete in terms of the pricing, because Russia is a huge producer. Anyway, I was wondering about how that all fits.
Yeah. So what is the question that Tucker
Tucker
Carlson asked Putin?
Tucker said, is the world divided into two energy camps? He was trying to make the point of, to your point, like 2 days ago, when you said that the big challenge to the West, and what I guess the consortium of CIA and our financial system can't allow, is the might of the resources of Russia to enter markets that they can't control. That was something that you had suggested, and we didn't go into detail about that. But I was thinking about that when Tucker had posed the question, but he didn't really provide a strategic answer. They were talking about BRICS, and I'll tell you, this was interesting to me too, that he had a real grasp, Putin had a real grasp of all the GDPs, all the growth, where they are, what their inflation rates were. That was central to everything he was thinking about, because he was making that point about SWIFT. And then he ultimately transitioned to, we share 1,000-mile-kilometer border with China. And I could only imagine what the trade is right now between China and Russia, because
Oh,
I don't have any idea what that
yeah,
means.
and
So
but he
anyway,
did speak to it. Yeah,
yeah,
he
so
did to it.
those are just thoughts that came up based on what you last said. But again, my point is, I don't think that Russia's expansionist. I think he's playing the game based on, like, look, guys, we're a geopolitical powerhouse, a nuclear powerhouse. We're Mother Russia. We sacrificed everything, and the neo Nazis are the problem. And then they went from there. But in the economic spectrum, they covered a lot.
Okay, so the implications of these 2 points, that Russia has no expansionist interests, and that Russia is prepared to negotiate peace now and has tried to settle this issue peacefully, historically leading into the conflict. All right. The implications of that is NATO is the aggressor in the war in Ukraine. Now, do you disagree with that?
Why do you think I'm shaking my head?
No,
Yes.
no, no, that's perfect. No, that's perfect. Yes, but let us understand. The Again, the backdrop is the prevailing narrative. What has Americans been told in order to put Ukrainian flags on their cars?
Exactly.
Right, right, okay, okay, right, okay. And we just in the early part of the conversation, and we're calling anyone who is listening to this, right, to verify, trust but verify, right, what we're saying, right? Okay, go back to the tape and see why we're saying what we're saying and verify it, because the implications is that the prevailing narrative has lied to us. Okay, all right, so let's go from there. Tucker, okay, Putin, in describing the history of the relationship with the Soviet Union, and as it dismantled, and then the experience of Russia, since then, with the United States, is one of Russia trusting us and we betraying their trust, or we pushing away the opportunities to work with them.
He also
It's
offered a collaboration on a missile defense
We're going
system.
to get to that. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point, because he tells us who to go ask. Right, right. Okay, so he used a word that seems trite for a world leader to use, but it has huge significance. He said that America tricked Russia in the 1990s. And he's referring to the fact that the H.W. Bush administration and the Clinton administration had given Russia a private assurance, right? That if Russia would support the reunification of Germany, the country that killed 20 million Russians in World War II, right? Okay, if Russia would support the reunification of Germany and support that reunified Germany joining NATO, that NATO would not expand 1 inch east of Germany,
Agreed.
right? Okay. And then when Clinton broke that promise and started expanding, in the late 90s, right, and stuff like that, and Russia was complaining, the rebuke is that we didn't put it in writing. So Putin in the interview characterized that as a trick. And why? Right. And this is hugely significant, easy enough to verify, right? Because a private assurance is a very powerful tool that governments use across the world to reach agreements to avoid war, right? And the most significant example of that is the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we've been talking to, right? At the height of the Cold War, 1962, right? The United States discovered that Russia had put intercontinental ballistic missiles in Cuba, right? Sufficient to hit every city in the United States, including Seattle, right? With a nuclear weapon. And the United States brought the world the closest, in the most public sense, to World War III over the fact that this was America's red line. There is no way the Soviet Union can have nuclear missiles in Cuba off the coast of the United States, right? Well, how did we solve the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? We solved the Cuban Missile Crisis with a private assurance. President Kennedy gave Premier Khrushchev a private assurance. If Russia would remove their missiles from Cuba, the United States would promise to never attack Cuba. Then, 6 months later, all secretly, the United States would remove their nuclear missiles from Turkey. Now, let's be clear, okay? Okay, the United States put nuclear missiles on the Soviet border in the 50s, and that the reason why Russia put missiles in Cuba was because they were responding to what the United States had already done in Turkey. Okay, so to save face, America's face, right? The fact that America agreed to remove the missiles from Turkey, right, had to remain a secret. And so we put Khrushchev and the Russians in the Soviet Union in a situation where, to the world, we were able to de-escalate the Cuban Missile Crisis because the Soviet Union agreed to remove the missiles out of Cuba just on the promise that the United States would no longer attack Cuba. No one knew about the fact that we had missiles in Turkey that we would then agree to remove. In Khrushchev's autobiography, he said the reason why he agreed to it over the objection of his own advisors is because he trusted Kennedy. Okay, so we avoided World War III and the Cuban Missile Crisis because the premier of the Soviet Union, our sworn enemy, trusted our president when he gave his word that 6 months later, they would remove the missiles from Turkey, right? Okay, fast forward to the early 90s, when the United States knew damn well what they were doing, when they gave a private assurance to Gorbachev and Yeltsin that they would not advance NATO 1 inch east of Germany. There is historical significance to that. At the height of the Cold War, we avoided the worst possible outcome on the basis of using a private assurance. Russia had every reason to believe that we would honor that. And we used that language on purpose. This is why he said in the interview with Tucker, America tricked us. But that wasn't the last time. He revealed, as you are starting to allude to, Patrick, before Bill Clinton left office, Bill Clinton went to Moscow, and he asked Bill Clinton if Russia requested to join NATO, right? Would Bill Clinton be supportive? And Bill Clinton said he found that interesting and that he would. And then he went and talked to his own people. And at dinner that night, he came back and says, "Oh no, we can't do that. We can't do that." Okay. So here, once again.
Okay, hold on. I've got one caveat to that from where I'm sitting. I agree with everything you said, except that I don't think Bill Clinton said, let's see, how did you just phrase that? The way I heard Putin phrase it was he had said, "Can we join NATO?" And I think Clinton, in what was the testimony from Putin in that interview with Tucker, was that Clinton said that's an interesting idea, and then came back and said, "We can't do it."
No, he didn't just say that was an interesting idea. He said well, what Putin said, he said, was that is an interesting idea. Yes, I think I would. Yes.
I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at that. But I heard it. I heard it that he was going to run it up the food chain because it was a big red flag for me, because it was like, okay, then wait a second. To your point, and it's an interesting point about Khrushchev being able to pull off what he did and what Kennedy did and everything else. And I'm also reminded of, we had nuclear missiles in Turkey long after that, by the way. And, so it was all the same thing, not to mention, and again, my come from has always been, we would not allow missiles in Cuba. We would not allow missiles in Mexico or Canada. So to me, the idea of Ukraine and NATO expansion is all, I think, from the Russian perspective, like you're saying, again, from a geopolitical post-World War II, given everything we've already talked about, very plausible, very, quite frankly, in context to global peace, rational. And so the only thing I disagreed with, and I had to make the point because I don't remember, because it was something that stuck clearly in my head. I thought that, because Clinton was as fishy or as slippery as they get, but what was standing out to my mind was, well, who was Clinton answering to? The entire NATO, and how does that fit? And how, I mean, because that's what's on display now. And that's what I'm trying to say Putin kept referring to, is that who's in charge of the United States? He's been in charge of Russia since what, 98? I mean, 90.
No, since 2000. Since 2000.
Okay.
No, yeah, since like 99. Yeah,
Just thinking
99,
of
90.
Yeltsin
Yeah,
and everybody. I mean, I don't.
yeah. Well, he was
Official,
involved in the leadership.
right, right. That's what
You
I'm saying.
know,
And again, he
there's
was in
always
a
a
position to
succession in
kind of
Russia.
catch all at that stage because of
Yeah.
what happened with Yeltsin. But anyway, to me, I don't want to beleaguer the point because it's not a giant point because I could see it going both ways. But to me, the thing that stuck in my head is again, who was in charge? Because the president's not in charge.
Well,
That's the point.
well, okay. This is okay. That is your point, and I get it. Putin's point, it ultimately was what you're saying, but in saying that occasion, he asked the president of the United
I
States
buy it. Let's just say I
to
buy that part of it, and I
right.
totally
Okay.
think Clinton.
And the thing is,
Who's in
we can go
charge?
ask.
Clinton's not in charge. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. No. See, the point that he's not in charge takes away from the fact that we can ask Bill Clinton, and we should damn well ask Bill Clinton, right? Because it's trying to set up what Putin is trying to say is that Russia was trying to be our ally. The reason why Russia is not our ally
That's what
is
I
because
heard. That's
America
what I heard. He
makes
said we're
them the
bourgeois,
enemy.
by the way. He said we're bourgeois. We're not kind, and that was
Yes,
another
we're
thing.
capitalists.
He's like, yeah,
That's
exactly.
right. Okay, no, but this is a point that America needs to understand. That he's saying that the reason why Russia is an enemy of the United States is because America wants Russia to be an enemy. It is not that Russia is not trying to work with us. He was opening the door for consideration for Russia to join NATO.
Right.
The
Who
president
killed
of the
Kennedy?
United
Who
States,
killed Kennedy?
well, see, I don't want to obscure the point.
But
The
hold on a second.
president
But
of
that's what he's saying though. Who's in charge? That's what I keep
no,
hearing.
no, no, no.
Who's
I
in,
understand. You're talking implications, but first let's understand the surface issue. The surface issue is Russia was trying to join, was opening the door to join NATO, and Bill Clinton found it interesting
Yep.
and said he was supportive of it
Yep.
to Putin. Of course, he had to go talk to his people, right? He went and talked to his people, and when he came back to Putin and said, "I have consulted with my people, and no, that's not possible."
Right.
There was a shift. Go back to the interview. Bill Clinton is still alive. We can go ahead and do that. Okay, so that effort to work with the United States was put aside. So then the issue comes up where the United States was drumming up the missile defense program under George W. Bush, right? They had Russia and this former Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, the United States, Gorbachev and Reagan, right? And then ultimately Papa Bush and stuff like that had basically tabled the missile defense system because it would destabilize the security of both countries by saying, oh, okay, the whole thing is mutually assured destruction, right? If the United States had missile defense, then it wouldn't be mutual. It would be that Russia would be destroyed and the United States would be defended against Russia. Okay, so now that means that we're at risk again, right? So America had put aside for the 90s, for late 80s, the missile defense program. Because Star Wars was introduced in the 80s, right? Okay. So W picked it up again. And Russia offered to work with the European Union and the United States to develop missile defense in order to protect all of us. All of us. In other words, it would be, he said it would be destabilizing to the balance of power, the security balance of power, right? If some people could defend themselves against a nuclear attack and others couldn't. Once again, he names Condoleezza Rice. He names key members of the National Security Council under George W. Bush, who came to the Kremlin in Moscow and told him, no, you can't work with us. So what does he have? So he says, okay, I can't work with you. So what do? They develop supersonic missile delivery technology to overwhelm missile defense systems, right? But why?
It was hypersonic.
Hypersonic, excuse me, hypersonic. You're right, hypersonic, right? Because once again, they didn't want to figure out a way to penetrate missile defense systems. They wanted to do it with us, but instead we pushed them back again. So what are they supposed to do? If you're going to be able to defend yourself against the nuclear bombs we launch, we have to create nuclear bombs that you can't defend yourself against. So he did, and has, and they lead the world in this technology, right? And oh, by the way, they're gonna okay. So once again, this is the pattern, right? And if that's true, ask Condoleezza Rice. She's over here talking all this nonsense. Ask her directly. Did Russia try to offer to jointly develop missile defense, right? And and we rejected them, right? Ask Bill Clinton. Did Vladimir Putin ask whether he'd be supportive if Russia requested to join NATO? Ask him, right? And let's see what they say, right? Because that's what he's saying. He knows they're totally in position to deny this. Oh, this never happened or whatever, right? He's trying to say he's calling them to task to call him a liar, right? Because they have evidence to prove what was said, right? And this is what I'm saying. If that is true, if that is true, that Russia trusted us, and that's why they supported the reunification of NATO. If it's true that they opened the door to joining NATO and we rejected them, if it's true that they offered to develop missile defense systems, right, with Europe and the United States, and we rejected them, and therefore they developed hypersonic, missile delivery systems and stuff like that to defeat those systems. Okay, if all those things are true, the reason why Russia is our enemy is because we have made them so. And America does not know that. American citizens do not know that. That is nowhere in the prevailing narrative. And so I'm saying, check it out. Patrick, I turn it over to you. Do you think that's not true?
Okay, again, it's so funny how you keep having these questions and they're rhetorical, but the bottom line is, what have I said throughout this whole time period? What have I said?
Well, I mean, you have said that we are not a democracy. We're not a capitalist country. You have
Did I
you are
acknowledge about the Minsky situation or the Minsk Accords? Did I acknowledge that Russia is not expansionist? What I'm agreeing with is that yes, Russia is not the aggressor here. I agree with all of that.
well, yeah, but here's the thing. This is what needs. Okay, this is a huge proof that we've been conned.
Of course.
What is our government telling us?
Right.
What is our main media telling us?
Right.
Conservative, progressive media. That okay, they're giving us a story to gain our confidence, to include and influence us to feel a certain way and support certain policies on the basis of that story that they're telling us.
What have I said a
And
couple of
what you
times?
agree,
Right. What have
yeah,
I said a couple of times that I thought that Putin had said remarkably in that interview on many occasions, especially at the outset, which was where the priority was, is who's in charge. That's
agree.
that's what I heard because what have I been banging my head against for the
Yes,
last,
you have.
what did he
Yes,
say? What did Putin say? They can't let you know this information. They can't let the first thing I thought about was
yes.
me. I was like, that's what he's talking about. Did he go into all the details of everything else? He doesn't have all the details unless they've studied what we've done. And I think he would. Why hasn't he? I don't know. Maybe there's back channels. Maybe they got their own problems. Look, let me explain something to you from where I'm coming from. Okay. I know
Please do.
that people are flawed. I understand power. I understand incentive. I understand paradigms. I understand systems. I understand ultimately, and I'm getting more and more of it, psychology, which we'll get into this side, this part of it. And I understand at this stage of my life, it's always psychology. Okay. At the beginning of everything, especially when you're talking about intelligence. And there was a reason that Putin set the tone that are we going to have a real dialogue or are we going to have a show? That was a direct shot over the bow, and he reemphasized it, I think, at least on one other
Yes.
occasion, okay,
Yes.
which again made me reconfigure my paradigm. As I said at the outset of this, I went into this thinking that basically Tucker was it's been everybody said it a useful idiot. No, what Tucker is doing is representing something that I've been intuiting for the longest time. My framing of this whole thing of what we're in the midst of at the moment is it's the new Confederacy versus the new robber barons. There is no of, for, and by the people. That's what we're trying to create. Okay. And what Tucker represents is the new Confederacy. That's my interpretation. And ultimately, the questions that Tucker kept asking, it was amazing because I just felt there was such control by Putin in a sense that he was going to say what he had to say, which got the only reason that in the sort of fusion of what Tucker was in terms of my perception and what Putin wanted to say, because again, the CIA, who he regards as a real competitor. I mean, again, The only time I felt like he showed any respect for anything was the CIA, quite frankly. That's in the three-dimensional chess and everything that they're dealing with. And he talked about, because the KGB does the same thing. Now, were they the aggressors a lot of the times in this particular instance that you're talking about? No, not towards the United States. But I think in certain circumstances, if we were to really get deep involved with what the KGB did in certain countries and under certain tactics and how they might operate, it would be along these lines to divide and conquer. That's how intelligence works. It's MI6, it's the CIA, it's KGB, it's how you control in a geopolitical sort of, and we've seen it our entire lives, where it's carrots and sticks. Whether in this geopolitical scenario, whether it's the United States and Israel, whether it's Russia and Syria, whether it's the United States and Western Europe, whether it's Russia and now the BRICS, I suppose, right? There's a process by, okay, where are we in alignment? Where is the synergy? Where are the points of leverage? And then how do you play those? Do you think all of those elements, like, for example, I've talked about this for years ad nauseum, that going back to the savings and loan crisis, that I learned from Bill Black, that the high flyers would do scenarios where they would invite politicians to lavish resorts in places like Las Vegas or Miami, where they would get them hopped up on cocaine, where they would get them set up with hookers, where they would get somebody with a beta cam in the closet to film a senator partaking in something that would destroy his career, so that they could leverage him to pass laws and not do the investigations through regulation that would hold the SNLs to account. That's part and parcel to what leads to what we all now have talked about for the last, I don't know, decade and a half, for those who are in the mix with Epstein and that sort of thing. So yes, intelligence has a lot of tricks. How many times did we see James Bond earlier in our lives, where it just kind of infers the whole thing? But there are tricks, there are leverage, there's geopolitical consequences and everything else. But to your point, and this is what I think is the most important takeaway of the whole thing for me, and I know that there's more points that we have to go down to, but why would Putin either handpick or how the whole thing evolved? And when I'm thinking about the whole thing evolving, I'm going back to 2016, because we know whatever the abbreviation of the KGB tech sector that we refer to later as troll farms were involved with the 2016 election. And then we found out later that Cambridge Analytica, of course, out of Britain, and then the Mercers were hyper involved with all sorts of algorithms, all sorts of techniques to be able to create what we've been in the midst of. That's even gotten worse now, because they did get into AI, and the AI is the next version of this thing in terms of manipulation of where everybody is. My question was, listening to this, and I got the answer, I think, from where I'm sitting, in terms of what is the alliance between what Tucker might represent and what Putin wants. I think Putin wants America out of Ukraine. I think he wants NATO to stop funding Ukraine. And I think that there's other things that obviously are part of his agenda because of how prevalent his economic sort of dissertation was. And those things were on display. But there was the immediate, there's the big picture. And he kept talking about sustainability, which I found awfully interesting. And at the same time, coming from a renewable energy sort of, zealot, because of all things, what I've been revealing through my truth bombs forever, which is the fossil fuel dependence and what that means in this structure of what controls America, intelligence, Wall Street, which undergirded by fossil fuel. And I keep thinking, where's the alignment between Tucker and Putin, aside from Tucker having the opportunity to reach hundreds of millions of people vis-a-vis what he also discussed, which was Elon. Elon's going to do whatever Elon wants, was, I think, his exact words, Putin, in reference to Elon. And that was really intriguing. And, but, here's a platform. He's going to get an uninterrupted version of what he wants to do. And what does he go into? He goes into Christianity. He goes into orthodoxy. He talks about, for example, how all different of the world's great religions in Russia have, been respected by the Russian government. And I can tell you right now that Jews didn't do too well under the pogroms of Russia for a very long time. And that was a first red flag. So it's kind of like, you can say whatever you want to say. And then he starts to get into the Russian Orthodoxy and how that's the culture. And that's what when he described the culture, he starts talking about secure borders, and he starts talking about, safety of the country, and then the culture of the family, and all of these touchstone pieces that I guarantee you that MAGA was listening to, and that MAGA will listen to, because between Russell Brand, between Glenn Greenwald, between Matt Taibbi, between, most importantly, Tucker Carlson, and probably downstream Joe Rogan, they're going to see that over and over and over, and they're going to have an alignment with Putin as somebody who speaks towards their identity. Now, in addition to that, like I said to you in our previous discussion, I've seen Putin going back to 2011, 2012, 2014, and these aren't necessarily issues that are super hyper important to me, but they're part of his conversation. And he was very, very adamant about it looked like making homosexuality not even a possibility in Russia. I know there was a very aggressive sort of, shall we say, MAGA-esque, like whatever that version is in Russia, where if you're gay, they're coming after you. And they did that, I recall, and I don't have all the specifics, it's just in the back of my mind, somewhere in the 2014 to 2018 range, as I recall, there was like a lot of things, because I remembered that, I was noticing a lot of Putin's sort of, I don't know, it almost felt like a gesture of camaraderie almost, but to a predominantly, what I would interpret coming from the United States, a white Christian sort of point of view. Okay. And again, I'm from Texas originally, so I know a lot of guys in that sort of category, and I grew up with it. Right. And it's just something I've known my whole life. And we know about the Confederacy and Jim Crow and blah, blah, blah. Right. So there are these certain kind of things where it was like, when I was listening to Tucker tee this up and interpret and go down that pathway, it was like, look, again, the Biden administration, the blue no matter who, the Democrats, that you have very accurately and I think effectively had pointed out that America is the aggressor in this relationship going back, to the Cold War, that had completely ignored every opportunity to create a stable, rational, logical approach to Russian power, which anybody who they've dismissed Russia as a global power over the course of the last, at least since the beginning of the Ukraine war, right? They don't have a sustainable economy. They're over their sort of skis, if you will, in terms of they're going to get tripped up. Meanwhile, they've been able to bounce through all of the swift and leverage of the global reserve currency, which has led us closer to BRICS. So that's the big part for him. But the cultural reference in Zenith to our election is, okay, what has the CIA and what has the KGB been doing since the Cold War? Inserting influence. What has the CIA done? Overthrown governments, inserted puppets, done things in Central America in our backyard, in South America in our backyard. What in service to what? In service to the private privatization. Privatization through being puppets of US influence through financialization and everything that comes with that, with our geopolitical global influence, particularly because we are the world's reserve currency. That's the reality of which Russians or Putin is butting up against. And I think he's incredibly clever. And I think he's incredibly intelligent. And I think he's incredibly effective at doing what I think they've done in other countries, but what we're seeing happen here. There is no worse enemy. There is no, let's see how I can phrase this. There is no bigger threat to the United States than the United States. The United States, with all of its maneuverings and chicanery of what we know, you and I, because the financialization of what the Wall Street and the intelligence ownership of this country that has hijacked our presumed democracy, with all of these lies all over the frickin' place, we are the enemy. Our elites, the people at the top who can game this whole thing that Clinton had to answer to, that everybody has to answer to. And again, I'll finish this up and I could go on, but I'll finish this point up with this. Imagine, if you will, Trump having to sit through that conversation yesterday with Putin, tracking on everything, and then giving us a dissertation that would make sense based on what Putin laid out. Imagine Trump understanding the geopolitical sorts of environments. Imagine him understanding the 1,000-year history, understanding Dostoevsky, understanding all of these things that we're talking about. Imagine Trump trying to distill that information and give us a plausible, comprehensive, thought-provoking, intelligent uh, interpretation of how his administration would be able to drive world sort of cooperation and betterment of humanity and all of those things. All I could hear in the back of my head was, based on everything I've seen vis-a-vis Trump, and we could be just as critical as Biden, because of course Biden, like Clinton, like Bush, like everybody else, is answering to the system that Putin has emphasized over and over, and he's using these other elements. But again, all I could think about with Trump was, how am I getting paid? Who am I getting paid by? How am I controlled? What's in it for me? He doesn't give a flying F about the country, about the separation of powers, about the liberty and justice for all, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution. That much is on display. So Putin is laughing his ass off at how easy it is to puppeteer, and I think he tapped into that with Trump back in Moscow with the beauty pageants and all the rest of it. And I think that's the useful idiot. That's the ultimate useful idiot. And so ultimately what I'm saying is, Putin identified who we are, what the problems are. He delivered the message that he had to, and then he's freaking pushing the political machinations to be able to, hopefully in his estimation, I don't think a guy even gives a shit about hope. He just does. He's about as pragmatic as it gets, and he's cold and calculating. And again, as we discussed in our last truth bomb, he's not a crazy person on the par of a Hitler or anybody who would be a mass murderer. Yes, he is a cold calculating machine who will murder anybody that is in his way to get what he needs to get. That's what Putin has shown me over and above, and that has nothing to do with our analysis. Given the 1,000-year history of Ukraine, it's a geopolitical situation with incredible machinations that, from where I'm sitting, we have bigger priorities in the United States, given what we know that Putin is inferring, that if we can somehow learn from what Putin is telling us, it certainly gives us a priority of where our thoughts should be, which is what he asked us. And by the way, neither neither Biden or Trump have any answers for.
Well, I appreciate that, as usual, my brother. You get to riffing. You lay it out there. So I appreciate the comment. But going back to the interview, the next huge thing that we need to highlight, and you've alluded to it in your comment, is he called America to task on the basis of, he identified what makes America powerful. What's at the source of our wealth? The source, as you said before, the source of our wealth is the strength of the dollar, is the strength of the dollar. And he called us to task for using the dollar as a tool of economic warfare. So as we've already pointed out in this conversation, right? In response, what Russia is doing in Ukraine relates to the fact that NATO has used subterfuge to change the Ukrainian government in order to convince Ukraine to join NATO. In other words, this was not an organic decision on the part of the Ukrainians, and that Russia is denying them their sovereignty. It is NATO and the United States specifically who's manipulated, the government of Ukraine to the benefit of NATO. And so as a result, that's why he's in. Okay. In response to Russia defending her, so in defense of their own national security, they can't have nuclear weapons in Ukraine, right? Okay, right. We have given them the economic death penalty. We have used our control over the US dollar, right, to say that Russia is not allowed to defend their own national security by involving themselves in our subterfuge to put NATO on their border, right? And he's saying, to what effect? You have sent the message to the world. America sent the message to the world by taking Russia's dollar denominated reserves, hundreds of billions of dollars, by seizing that, right? You've sent the message to all the other countries whose reserves are in US dollars that at a drop of a hat, even in the defense of your own national security, America retains the right to take your money, right? Right. And so what all that has done is encourage even our allies to say, okay, we can't, the American dollar can't be the reserve currency. And so what has that done? You've referenced it multiple times. The rapid expansion of the BRICS. So Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Okay, that was what it started as, right? We have, by isolating Russia economically, we have pushed them over into making economic trade deals, particularly with their natural gas and oil, with India, with Brazil, with China, that has produced a stronger Russia. Russia is the strongest European nation. And what used to be the strongest European nation, Germany, is in deep recession and in decline, right? Because of what we just did, right? And what BRICS is doing is saying, okay, if none of our countries can be secure holding US dollars because America retains the right to pull them back, to take them, right? Okay, we're going to start using other currencies. So in order to do that, they have to create a critical mass of global economic activity to use another currency as the basis. So they're going after the petrodollar. So how did BRICS expand? As of January 2024, BRICS added Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab United Arab Emirates, Venezuela, right? Ethiopia, okay, they're bringing in the largest oil producers in the world, right, into BRICS, right? And now they're going to, all those countries have deals with the globe, to sell oil. They're going to start using the yuan. They're going to start using a currency that's not the United States. And he specifically looks to America and looks to the American people and says, you don't understand. If America's whole house of cards in terms of their financial structure is tied to the value of the dollar, okay, the reason why the value of the dollar is still high despite the trillions of dollars that we print. We have overprinted US currency, and it usually oversupply drops your price. The reason why the unit price, the unit value of the US dollar is high is because everyone needs to hold dollars. If everyone doesn't need to hold dollars, then the value of the dollar is going to go back to what it would otherwise be if people had an alternative. And given the fact that we've overprinted, it will collapse the US economy. Okay. And to talk to economists, you'll see what I'm saying. And he's saying, why would you use the basis of your economic strength as a weapon against other countries? Because all you've done is convince them that they can't trust you, that they can't trust the dollar. And as a result, this is what, so it's not just BRICS plus six. It's not just the oil producing countries. France tried to join BRICS. There's like 50 countries who tried to. Don't worry, our allies are going to try to get over there. Why? Because they can't have it that the moment they're in the crosshairs of the United States, we're going to pull their reserves. Who's over their skis? It's us. And he's saying to us, why would you do this? Why would you take your strength, use it as a weapon against someone so that everyone no longer needs your strength, no longer wants your strength. They're going to seek any alternative they can, right? And the proof of the pudding is, how is Russia doing? Russia is stronger militarily. Russia is stronger economically, right? Because of the trade that they have with China, the trade that they have with India, and stuff like that. And guess what? Right. And so all I'm saying, again, he has been clear. What is America doing? His using the example of Germany Tucker asked him specifically, if Germany understands that the United States blew up the Nord Stream, through U.S. influence, blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and the impact that that's had on Germany. Look at German economics ever since the war in Ukraine. Right? Okay. Right? Why would the Germans still support it? And his answer was clear. Because the leadership in Germany is no longer advancing the interest of Germany. They're advancing the interest, general Western interest, which is general American interest, right? But as I just told you, as Putin just told us, with the use of the US dollar as a weapon, America is not advancing America's interests. Why? They're advancing the interests of the oligarchs. They're advancing the interests of the ultra rich who's controlling things at the detriment of America, at the detriment of Germany, at the detriment of okay. And he's saying, at what point are the American citizens going to wake up to the reality, right? That the powerful people, the ultra rich in their own country, is undermining even them, right? This is who is attacking. This is the basis by which Russia finds himself in their situation. But how he secured Russia, because America gave him no choice, is to form a separate new international system of trade, right? And more countries want to go over there because there's no safety under the SWIFT system anymore. America has proven that, right? Because at the end of the day, the rest of the world does actually understand that NATO expansion is the cause of the war in Ukraine. The rest of the world does understand, notwithstanding the lies that our media tells us, right? That it's not Russia who's expanded, it's NATO that's expanded. And that once Russia drew the line, they didn't draw the line for the first 14 countries we added to NATO after, east of Germany, right? They didn't draw the line there. They drew the line on their border, right? And that in response to them drawing the line on their border, we gave them the death penalty, economic death penalty. Countries are done. They see that. They see that the only interest that matters to America, it would be wonderful if it was just, not wonderful, it would make sense if it was just America's interest. No, the only interest that matters to America is the ultra rich interest that's controlling America and now controlling everyone else. And this is what, Patrick, you are trying to reveal in the con. We've seen it in our inter-economic situation, but it's a global phenomenon, and Putin is just speaking to it. So the important takeaway that needs to be trumpeted, we need to trumpet the things that Putin was saying that are factually verifiable, right? That are true, right? Why? Because he's revealing the con in his own way. He's taking it from a top down, just like David Webb did in The Great Taken. He's taking it from a top down perspective. He doesn't speak to your details, Patrick, because you've taken it from the individual up, right? And that's great. That's huge, right? But it's as above, so below, right? Yes, it's the same methodology through the whole process, right? And so we need more and more people, including you, Patrick, because you're such a powerful voice, to set aside. There's a lot of reason not to trust. There's a lot of personality issues. There's a lot of deceit. There's a lot of vested interest. And just illuminate the facts. Just illuminate the facts that we can all rely on, because they have profound implications. Right. And if we can get back to the facts, this is what's going to empower the American people to do what? To come in here, join the Clean New Deal, elected independent president of the United States. And what Putin is offering as a prospect, as a possibility, is we may find a world that is so ready to deal with an America who's actually representing the people, as opposed to an America who's only representing the interests of this tiny cabal of controllers, and that's a cause for optimism, right? But okay, so I'm going to stop there. Thoughts, Patrick?
I thought you presented that brilliantly, Kevin. That was really magic. Because I wanted to get to the point of the dialogue where Trump, Putin emphasized 33 trillion. Again, what he's saying is, look, I mean, he knows the jig is up. He knows that it. See, this is what I've been saying to my friends from the MMT world, because their whole point is, here's the key takeaways: that taxes don't fund the federal government. That as long as you've got productive capacity, Congress has the power of the purse, that they can budget anything, and based on kind of Keynesian economics to begin. But the way the description is of modern monetary theory is that the way we finance our government is based on the sum total of the productive capacity to be able to fund that which is ironically the ideals of finance, where money goes to the best and best used practices for society, which of course we've illuminated that is just the opposite. It's pure theft that is going to these people that Putin is saying has created a top down, top heavy situation that's, going like the Tower of Babel or Yahtzee, whatever your favorite metaphor is in terms of your real world, right? And that's what we've been dealing with. And you brilliantly laid out the construct of the global scenario, because we are at a crossroads. Because the point that I need to close up on the MMT guys is that, and this is what the importance of working from the bottom up to reveal what we reveal in the con at www.thecon.tv, which is the blueprint for how our financial system has completely hijacked the government using CEOs, basically, let's just call it a tyrannical oligarchic fiefdom that basically uses psychology and all sorts of manner, shape, or form of pure predation and a financial capitalism, which cannot be construed or conferred or confused with industrial capitalism. But there is no, like I continue to say over and over, there is no risk reward. What we continue to reveal that Putin hasn't revealed, because he's probably got a lot of money riding on it before they can transition, but that the full faith and credit of the United States, through Federal Reserve Act 13.3, enabled us to basically print this money that both you and Putin are talking about, that go to the guys that are the puppeteers. They're the control masters. They're the in-between guys. They're our entire financial system. They're the too big to fail apparatus of the systemically important financial institutions that involve the asset managers, the hedge funds, the private equity, and then private wealth management and all of the rest of it. But in the end, what you have to understand is what creates the fucking sausage. You got to understand what the commodities are and how they're formed and how they're morphed and how these techniques can create sawdust based on fees that in the end can be guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States to do what? To expand militarily for a handful of guys that want more and more at the behest of a nuclear power? I mean, that's what we're talking about. They're just driving us to complete oblivion. And what I've observed since 2008, and quite frankly, since 2001, is that whole Charlton Heston thing with, his speech to the NRA, not by my cold, dead hands will they give up the control. They will not give up the control. So our fight isn't, and it shouldn't be, around the globe and everywhere else. It should be internally with a vast majority of Americans not splintered in all of these different silos where where these guys are going to manifest this control for this civil war that's going to create this outcome. And as we celebrate the Super Bowl, the Swifties versus the MAGAs and all the stupidity that comes from, mainstream media that's going to hyper ventilate us into what, like a couple of commercials, let's say for Apple, because of their next version of AI, which he also discussed and demonstrated. But going back to the key and the most credible point in which you brilliantly are orchestrated, guys, everything is on the line. But here's the one key that, it'd be really interesting.
Say that again, Patrick. Everything is all a lie.
Everything is all a lie and everything is on the line.
Oh, on the line. I see.
Yeah, but everything is all a lie. And that comes to the deception racket of all of these different sorts of, who's working for who's in control. And what I keep telling you, going back to you, I mean, we both agree, but I mean, this is exactly what Putin is telling us. When Clinton had to go to whoever the powers that be are it's not just NATO as an organization, which is the inference. No, it's the whole puppeteering matrix of what he said at the outset. He said it's the CIA. He didn't say the CIA because nobody in the intelligence world, like, he just inferred it. And then of course he made fun, by the way, of Tucker for having not gotten in the CIA,
Yeah.
as if to discuss, dude, in my world, you're second rate, buddy. I mean, you're never going to come to who I am. So let's get that straight now. That was really funny, man. I mean, talking
Yeah,
about
no,
it,
exactly. And I think we would enjoy that. Your point is well taken. He
it,
absolutely,
but again,
pulled that at Tucker Carlson.
but I'll finish the point this way. I really felt like that interview, ironically, when you asked me to watch it, I went in there with a perception of what was going to happen, which I thought was going to be pure propaganda, only to learn that he was actually revealing to everybody what we've been revealing the whole time, but without the absolute details that we have, that we spent 13 years and millions of dollars to do with the United States government that has. And it kills me when I think of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, and all of these different agencies that have tens of thousands of employees and billions of dollars of budget, billions, to not achieve what we did with a $4.5 million boots by the pick yourself up by the bootstraps, complete commitment to the American dream, to find the facts that the entire scope of media basically said, America, you don't need to know what happened to you because you're expendable garbage. What you are is garbage. And we're going to pretend like we don't know what's going on because we're all getting a piece. That's exactly what Putin laid out. And I don't know if there's anything more to say except on this from my point of view. Listen, man, when we watch the Super Bowl, okay, every single storyline comes from something that is extraordinary. Nobody handed these guys on that field the opportunity to play for the world championship of a game that we celebrate in the United States, whatever. It's American, whatever, but they're the best American. The product is what you see. It's a meritocracy. It's a bunch of guys that have to fight through this incredibly difficult season to achieve the impossible. And that's why we celebrate it, because we all live vicariously through them, because we want to feel like anything is possible. The American dream, that if you fight and you're tenacious and you can, do the right things, that things are going to come together and you're going to achieve your dream. That's what this is all about. What if we were to find out the whole thing was a facade, that the whole thing was gamed and rigged, that the outcomes were written well in advance, that it was going to benefit those who are absolutely in control of this thing? I think we'd have an absolute implosion, civil war on the spot, just because that's where everybody's head is. But that's exactly what we're dealing with this story of the betrayal and deception and mass indoctrination to what, in my estimation, Putin was revealing is almost a when he, again, I keep saying, and I keep coming back to this idea that he showed deference almost to the CIA. Like, these guys are diabolical bastards. That's what I was hearing from these guys, and they're
Oh
really,
yeah, oh
and
yeah.
they're really good. And
A
they're
killer
really,
recognizes a real killer.
yeah, and that's what I was hearing in that whole thing. And I'm
It's
like, oh
like,
my God, that's exactly. And again, I'll finish. This is the last point that I have to say. In America, if you're listening to us and you understand and you get inside the machine of what we're revealing to you, it was Sullivan and Cromwell that saved Wall Street. Who is Sullivan and Cromwell? They are the law firm that represented Wall Street's interest all the way going back from before the Cold War, right after World War II, that created the CIA. Come on. Come on. We're talking $70 trillion that they were at the seat of the table for what they self-prescribed as the consortium. Come on. Anyway, we've said all of that stuff. So please, final words are yours, unless you want to keep going.
sure.
Dude, it's Super Bowl. I got to get running, man.
No, it's a great day, and I hope you have a great time. I just want to clean up an error that I made when I was riffing. BRICS plus six, the six countries that came in, I erroneously included Venezuela. The six countries are Saudi Arabia, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Argentina, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Okay, so I just wanted to clear that up. But Patrick, what a
Egypt?
great
Egypt?
Egypt, yes,
Okay,
Egypt. I
interesting, because
know.
that's a whole ball of freaking, yeah,
Isn't that, yeah,
that's some
that
super
could lead us
rad.
into another conversation, which I do think we need to have.
I would
I
love
do
to,
think we
but
need to
but
have
then
that.
again, but I love how you brought up Argentina, because it's like,
It's Argentina.
where did the Friedman experiment begin of the privatization? It was the school of Chicago that tried all of this stuff out and hatched it as kind of a test run in Argentina and Chile. But I mean, that's part and parcel to this whole
Yes.
CIA madness and what's led us to this situation. And you know what, man? Okay, guys, the Clean New Deal, let's remind everybody what we're doing here. Listen, you have to understand, we're trying to provide you all of the evidence that the entire system of both media that also has tens of thousands of employees and billions of dollars in budget wouldn't reveal to us. The government didn't do. So what we have to do is use all of the elements that we have already aggregated, achieved, and set forth in all of our collective work at the con, www.thecon.tv, also the new Untouchables, and I dare say a lot of truth bombs that I've laid down. But that aggregate information is so bulletproof, and you'll understand once you see it, because it involves all the top people that come from all of the agencies that are tasked to make sure this doesn't happen, and they tell us the absolute truth and the evidence and all of the things that come from it, which is another 5-hour conversation, right? But ultimately, that can be used if we had a presidential candidate that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 million plus of us came together behind to some miraculously get involved with this 2024 presidential election that understands everything that we're talking about to drive this thing forward, because the only national election we have is the presidential election, and it is the ultimate bully pulpit, and it is the ultimate expression of the American voice. And if that person was able to galvanize everything that we have and set everything forth, they could smash forward the ability to get root out this mass corruption. And remember, absolute corruption, absolute power creates absolute corruption, which is exactly what we've got. And when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. This isn't new. This is history, my friends. This is what's been going on forever. We have to use the lessons of history, reality, but most importantly, the facts, the evidence of who did what, when, and how, because we have all of the laws that the government is using and displaying. And this is my message to everybody who supports Donald Trump. The government is demonstrating that everything that they're saying Donald Trump is guilty of is what they let Wall Street get away with. Only Wall Street buried tens of millions of us and stole tens of trillions of dollars. Is that okay with all of you guys out there? Well, I promise you, neither Bush or Trump have a resolution for this. They're both two sides of the same coin in terms of the system, and they can both be controlled by this system, not to your benefit, because it's not a country of, by, and for the people. It's a country of, by, and for the corruption. And that's what we're trying to smash. And in the end of this, when you understand that they got away with $70 trillion, and that's probably a low figure, to be honest with you, since 2013, that's tangible. I can show you every aspect of how this happened over the course of time. 2009 is a big year. 2011 through 14 was huge. 2019 was huge. And then, of course, all things COVID. And then where we are now, and more to come, because bank failures are happening rapidly because of the commercial real estate implosion, which is all part and parcel to this whole thing. If we don't get a hold of our system, we're done. And the only thing this system can do to continue its control and power, I believe, based on what Putin is saying, is launch World War III. To the benefit of whom, Kevin? To the benefit of whom?
Well, that's only to the benefit of that micro group of ultra wealthy. Yeah, it's
That have
not to the
betrayed
benefit.
us, that have hijacked the United States, that has turned of, by, and for the people through separation of powers and the integrity of law, which is the Constitution, into a shit show that nobody can even recognize at the moment.
Let's just call them the bunker class. They've already built their bunkers. So you know where that leaves the rest of us. Patrick, this was fantastic, my friend. I want you to go and have a great Super Bowl Sunday. You know, we will have a future podcast on Super Bowl Sunday, on the Super Bowl, and why, despite me being a passionate fan like you, I no longer watch the sports. So we'll talk about that too. But thank you so much for today's
Man,
conversation.
much respect, much love. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this dialogue. And I'll finish what I always finish with. Look, guys, failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt. This is the Clean New Deal. I call it the righteous grind. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. Onwards and upwards.